Hello and welcome to the first installment of Fantasy Player Positional Breakdowns. I am Ace. I'm joined today, as I will be with the rest of these shows, by Jay and Andrew. We will be breaking down today the top 10 quarterbacks for the 2021 season as ranked by fantasypros.com. We're going to take a look at a couple outside the top 10. I'm going to ask these guys a couple of their favorites or maybe not so favorites, and we'll finish off today's shorter episode with a buy or sell round. We're going to get right into it, and we're going to start with Patrick Mahomes. So I'm going to get
Pretty good.
I'm gonna get your impression, Jay. But Patrick Mahomes last season had 380.4 fantasy points. He threw the ball 588 times, 390 completions for 4,740 yards, 38 touchdowns to 6 interceptions, and he also ran the ball 62 times for 308 yards and 2 touchdowns. Talk to me about Patrick Mahomes, Jay.
Well, I don't think Fantasy Pros is, blow anybody's minds putting Patrick Mahomes number one. He's number one for a reason. He's the starting quarterback on what is almost always the best offense in the league. Since he became the starting quarterback, Kansas City Chiefs have been first in points per game in 2018 at 34.8, second in 2019 at 29.9, and last year was the worst ranking they ever had, and that was fifth, and they were still averaging about 28.5. Last year, he only played 15 games, missed the last game of the season because, the Chiefs were already sealed up with the 1 seed. No big deal. He actually had so he didn't lead the season in most points per game, but he led in average fantasy points per game at 25.4. He finished fourth, like I said, in total points, which was at 380.3, just a little bit behind Josh Allen. If you take his average and you assume that he just hit his average in that last game, he would have actually been first. So, there's a little tidbit for you. Another reason why he's number one. Again, since he became the starter, his fantasy finishes for overall season long has been first in 2018. He finished eighth in 2019. That's when he missed 2.5 games with that knee scare. Oh my God, had me so scared. And then he finished fourth last season, as I mentioned. So when you're the starting quarterback for one of the most explosive, one of the highest scoring, and one of the craziest offenses we've seen in a long time with so many weapons like that, there's every right for him to be number one. So,
right on. All right, Andrew. So we're gonna hop in. We're gonna hop into Josh Allen next. You can give me your impressions of Josh. So Josh Allen for the Buffalo Bills had 406.06 fantasy points last season. He completed 396 of his 572 passes for 4,544 yards, 37 touchdowns to 10 interceptions. He ran the ball a little bit more than Pat, 102 times for 421 yards and 8 rushing touchdowns. What do you think about Josh?
So the main thing that you want to look at here with Josh Allen, the drastic improvement in accuracy from year 2 to year 3, 58.8% to 69.2. That impact Stephon Diggs gave to the Bills offense cannot be overstated. And then you added a guy like Emmanuel Sanders, who they just signed in the offseason. He's 34, but I still think he has a lot left to give, especially when it comes to the short and intermediate parts of the field, where Josh Allen has been able to, especially with Cole Beasley being healthy for him, he's been able to, like I said, drastically improve his ability to work the field. His yards per attempt numbers are at a very solid number at around 7.5. So that's where you like to see him hang his hat at. I expect his numbers to be relatively similar to what they were in 2020. Like I said, a lot of improvement in the short passing accuracy, and then the re-signing of his offensive line to keep the continuity with Darrell Williams and his boy, as you like to mention, John Feliciano, will just kind of add to what was the second best offensive scoring unit in the NFL last year. They averaged 31.3 points a game. His quarterback rating was passer rating, was 107.2. And like you mentioned, he can do it with his feet. He scored 8 touchdowns on the ground. He turned the ball over 16 times last year. It's not that's not probably that's not terrible. It's something that I expect him to keep cleaning up, especially when you see the improvement from completion percentage from year 2 to year 3. So Josh Allen, I expect him to finish right where he was in 2020, in 2021. He's a great quarterback and great fantasy player.
Yeah, absolutely. So another semi-mobile quarterback, Kyler Murray's next on our list. 390.74 fantasy points last year by Fantasy Pros. 375 completions for 3,971 yards, 26 touchdowns to 12 interceptions. Ran the ball a little bit more with 133 attempts for 819 yards, so a little bit more of a rusher than Josh for 11 touchdowns. Jay, talk to me about Kyler.
Yeah, so Kyler makes his fantasy money on the ground. That's not a surprise to anybody. They did go and get him AJ Green and then added Rodney Hudson, which I think are two players that can really help improve that offense in general. But I have two guys that I think are a little overinflated based on their production last season, and I just am not 100% sure it's sustainable. He finished his QB2 last season, finished his QB7 in 2019. He's going to average about 3,800 passing yards and about 23 passing touchdowns. That's about what it's looking like for his first two seasons. I don't see that drastically changing. What I can see drastically changing is that rushing. He had 11 rushing touchdowns last season. That puts him tied for sixth in rushing touchdowns, only behind Derrick Henry, Alvin Kamara, Dalvin Cook, Cam Newton, Josh Jacobs, Nick Chubb, and Jonathan Taylor. So, I mean, you were pretty much getting that dual threat ability at its maximum capacity. He was getting the yards. He was getting the touchdowns. We saw that kind of come to a head and then slow down towards the end of the season when he had that hip injury and he wasn't running the ball through weeks like 11 through 15. He picked it up a little bit more when it was do or die time in the last few weeks of the season. Mm-hmm. But when you're just looking at the standings, he's third right now. I would rather have Lamar. I would probably rather have Deshaun. I'd probably rather have Dak, to be honest. Again, that rushing ability is going to keep his ceiling high, but if anybody's anticipating him to score 11 rushing touchdowns again, he only had 5 in his first season. And I say only. 5 is a lot, but 11 is ridiculous. I mean, Cam Newton's only had 3 times in his career, and Cam Newton's a much better rusher, a much bigger runner, physical guy who gets the goal line work, too, in the running game. He's only had double-digit touchdowns 3 times in his career. So it's just something that I can see, Kyler Murray still being a very solid fantasy quarterback, but number 3 being a little too high considering his smaller stature, considering the 11 touchdowns he had last season. It's something that may be a little bit hard to repeat going into 2021.
Yeah, and what we'll see kind of on here is a theme of a lot of rushers on this list. As we saw Kyler, Josh, and Patrick all kind of have some legs to them. This next guy has probably the most legs to him. Lamar Jackson finished with 341.78 fantasy points last season, 242 completions, which is a lot less than the other guys in this group, for 2,757 yards, 26 touchdowns to 9 interceptions. He ran the ball the most out of any quarterback last year, 159 times for 1,005 yards and 7 touchdowns. Andrew, thoughts on Lamar's fantasy value next year?
Yeah, so the running quarterback is just kind of the way of the NFL world nowadays, right? It's the kind of guy you want on your fantasy team. Lamar Jackson is the best at it in the NFL right now. He finished 2020 with his second straight season going over 1,000 rushing yards, which is just absurd because we remember a guy named Michael Vick who only did it one time. I expect the Ravens to probably add to the receiving core at some point this offseason to kind of help him out. I would like him to show improvement in ball security when he's running the ball, though. That's one of my biggest issues. He fumbled the ball 10 times, and they only lost 4 of them, but 10 fumbles is a lot. And I understand that rushing attempts are, 159 rushing attempts is a lot for a quarterback. That's good for about 6.5 yards per carry, just a touch over that, actually. And one thing I found interesting, too, is, like, as a quarterback, a lot of you get first downs, a third and short, second and short. A lot of times you hand the ball off, you run your best play with your running back and be able to get that first down. He was 9th in the NFL in first down gains while rushing the football. So just based on the way the Ravens offense is built, I would expect them to either get close or eclipse 1,000 rushing yards again. The Baltimore Ravens ran for over 3,000 yards as a team for the second straight season. So you see the way this offense just changed once Lamar got into the system. They changed drastically. John Harbaugh pivoted completely from their offensive philosophy from the days of Joe Flacco to now Lamar Jackson. And as long as they keep, Mark Andrews and Hollywood Brown are great targets for him. I think they need another piece away in the passing game. And just based on the way their offenses, don't expect them to be close to the passing attempts, but expect their rushing attempts to be about like 60 attempts higher than the other guys. So Just much like Josh Allen, I could expect Lamar Jackson to kind of finish in the top 5 range, kind of where he's at right now at 4. So I'm loving some Lamar for next season. Give me all of it.
Yeah, for sure. So someone that maybe people are not sure about or not maybe are going to be selling a little bit is our next quarterback, Deshaun Watson. And off the field potential issues aside, we'll look at his fantasy stats and we'll just judge things on that. So 376.32 fantasy points last season. He had 382 completions for 4,823 yards. So he led the league in yards thrown, I believe. 33 touchdowns to 7 interceptions, and he rushed the ball 90 times for 444 yards and 3 touchdowns. Jay, so, real life aside, what do you think about Deshaun's fantasy value next year?
So, I mean, obviously you mentioned that, that's what's going on with him off the field. There's also a big question with him on the field, right? Where the heck is he going? It doesn't seem like he definitely doesn't want to be in Houston. He's made that known. Houston doesn't seem like they have any intention of trading him at the moment. They may be forced by him. Their hand may be forced in order to make a move because he just doesn't want to be there and he's just not going to show up. I mean, the one thing we know about Deshaun Watson is he's consistent the last 3 years. He finished 5th last year, 4th the year before that, and 5th the year before that. So that 5th ranking looks pretty darn good right now on Fantasy Pros. The interesting thing with him is we've seen him kind of balance out. So in the first 2 years, we saw his rushing ability more on par, where he had 5 touchdowns in 2018, and then he had 7 rushing touchdowns in 2019. His passing touchdowns were a little lower those 2 years at around 25 and then 28 in 2018 and 2019 respectively. We saw last year the passing touchdowns increase where he had 33, and then his rushing touchdowns went down a little bit where he only had 3. So, I mean, the thing about him is it seems like he's going to be a consistent player. We know he's a playmaker. He get it done on the ground and through the air. And the thing that you like to see is he got it done with good teams and bad teams, right? I mean, we talked about it before. That Houston Texan team in 2019 was up by 21 points to the Kansas City Chiefs in the AFC playoffs. And, we saw last year that team was absolutely terrible. And regardless of whether the situation, whether they're good, whether they're bad, we know Deshaun Watson's going to be a consistent staple guy who goes ahead and can put up fantasy points regardless of the situation that his team may find himself in.
Yeah. He's facing a little bit of adversity in his personal life right now. He did face a lot of adversity on the field last year, so this guy potentially has what it takes to overcome these obstacles, and we'll see how that plays out. So talking about obstacles, our next quarterback had the obstacle of having a season-ending injury last season, so Dak Prescott is our next quarterback on this list. He only finished with 139.64 fantasy points, with 151 completions for 1,856 yards, 9 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, and ran the ball 18 times, 93 yards, and 3 touchdowns. So obviously an incomplete season last year. Andrew, what's your thoughts on his 2021 season, though?
If I'm Dak, I just got paid. I'm coming back to Zeke, CeeDee Lamb, Amari Cooper, Michael Gallup, Blake Jarwin. I mean, he's got to be licking his chops to be back on the football field, man. And I am for him. I mean, nothing more American, I guess, than a Cowboy the Cowboys having a gunslinger, a true gunslinger for a quarterback. I mean, this guy, he only played 5 games last season, but he still had the highest passing yard game of any quarterback the entirety of all last season. He passed for 502 yards in week 3. In those 5 games, 3 of those games where he passed for over 450 yards, and in every single game he played, he had a completion percentage over 64% before his injury. So he's shown that he can get it done. He's a franchise quarterback. It took a year longer for him to get paid, but he did get paid. I expect him to be a top 5 quarterback, probably supplanting like Kyler Murray or something, or probably just supplanting Kyler Murray. I don't see the other 4 dropping out. Lamar, Deshaun, Pat, and Josh. As long as they're healthy and playing, they're going to be top 5 quarterbacks. He's shown good ball security when he's running the ball. He's productive in it. In all of his seasons with the Cowboys, aside from last year, he had over 5 rushing touchdowns. So again, I'm really looking forward to him returning to the football field. I think he's one of the top tier quarterbacks in the NFL, and the Cowboys are very, very lucky to have him, in my opinion. And I think that offense is going to be one of the premier offenses in the NFL. And so will Dak at the quarterback position.
So talking about premier quarterback at his position, we have Aaron Rodgers next. Last year's MVP, blazed the league, so to speak, with 388.26 fantasy points. He threw the ball 526 times for 4,299 yards. 48 touchdowns was the high last year with 5 interceptions. Ran the ball a little bit, 38 times, 149 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Aaron Rodgers, what's your take on him, Jay?
Yeah, so he's one of the guys that I mentioned when I was talking about Kyler that I think his fantasy value, I mean, not as a player because he's amazing, but his fantasy value was a little bit overvalued last season considering that crazy amount of touchdowns. He threw almost 50 touchdowns. And last year he finished third amongst quarterbacks in fantasy points. 2019 he finished 10th. And in 2018, he finished 6th. So it's not like he's been awful in those other years. He just hasn't been the top 3 that he has, which is why I think Fantasy Pros is right on the money. Good on you, Fantasy Pros. You know what I'm saying? They're a part. We got a little bit with them. So Fantasy Pros, great job right there. I think that's a perfect rating for him. Like we mentioned already, 48 touchdowns is a lot. Devontae Adams had 18 touchdowns last year. I already talked about Robert Tonyan in a previous episode about him having flipping 11, and his touchdown to reception ratio is through the roof. I don't see that continuing. I see them being able to go back to getting some more rushing touchdowns. That was something that kind of deflated his fantasy value last year, which led him to finishing 10th. He wasn't throwing as many obviously, he only thrown 40 touchdowns 3 times in his career. And I say only, but I mean, he's unbelievable. He's Aaron Rodgers. But 48 is something he's never seen. He's never thrown more than 43. So, I'm just going to his last 2 seasons before that, he threw 26 in 2019 and 25 in 2018. So not that I think he's going to be a good fantasy player, but I think 7 is right on the money. I would personally rather have Russell Wilson because he runs a little bit more. And I kind of might want to have Justin Herbert a little more with that offensive firepower that he has over there and how much they're going to let him rip the ball. But Aaron Rodgers sitting at 7 is a solid option right there for Fantasy Pros to have him in that ranking.
Okay, so as you said, Russell Wilson is at 8. Russell Wilson, 372.78 fantasy points last season, 384 completions for 4,212 yards. He threw 40 touchdowns and gave up the ball 13 times through the air. 83 rushes for 513 yards and 2 touchdowns. Give me what your thoughts are on Russell Wilson, Andrew.
So I guess my Russell Wilson take has to be, where I think he's going to finish has to be a little affected by my DK Metcalf take because I expect DK Metcalf to have a bit of a regression this year. No agreeing there, Johnny. The reason why is in the last couple seasons, and I mentioned it a couple times before, the second half of the season has really been a struggle for Seattle. Over the last 7 games of last season, he was unable to pass for more than 250 yards or more than 2 touchdowns in the same game. So that's cause for concern. Jay mentioned it too one time in a previous broadcast that, he gets his offensive line gets a lot of slack for not being good at pass protection. They were ranked in the top 10 of pass pro, and he also ran into 14 sacks on his own by running out of the pocket. So again, some self-reflection would do him some good. He fumbled 7 times and he only lost 4 of them. But again, that's a ball security thing where if you're going to be a mobile quarterback and you're going to run the ball a lot, you're going to want him to, especially if he's throwing 13 interceptions, you're going to want to make sure that if you're going to take off running and you're going to run out of a clean pocket, you better hold on to that football. So I expect him to finish in the top 10. I'm not exactly sure where yet, just because, again, he is Russell Wilson and throwing over 4,000 yards and for 35-plus touchdowns is nothing out of the realm of possibility for him. But in a division with so much pass rushing talent, I could see him kind of struggling a little bit to put up the same numbers as last season. So about 8 is where I would probably have him. But again, the guy we're going to talk about next, I think is going to probably take a bigger leap and maybe, again, overtake this 8 spot or maybe even higher.
Yeah, you both have mentioned Justin Herbert, and he's the next quarterback on our list. He came into last season as a rookie, started second game of the season for the Chargers, 342.84 fantasy points, threw the ball almost 600 times, completed just under 400 completions for 4,336 yards, 31 touchdowns to 10 interceptions, ran the ball 55 times for 234 yards and 5 touchdowns. So, Jay, you already mentioned Justin Herbert. Let's get into it a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, we saw him burst onto the scene as a rookie and was able to, command that offense. He was kind of thrown in there with that trainer snafu that derailed Tyrod Taylor's season. I think Justin Herbert would have shown his talent anyway and taken over the position eventually. That was something that everyone was kind of hinting to. But, got thrown in there, was able to come in and do some things, obviously. Asa kind of mentioned his stats already with 4,300 passing yards, 31 touchdowns, 5 on the ground, 36 total touchdowns your rookie year. That's phenomenal. he broke pretty much every rookie record in terms of passing yardage and touchdowns. When you look at his weapons, it's something that's really nice to see. He's got Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. They did lose Hunter Henry, but they were able to sign Jared Cook back. And they still have Donald Parham season, baby. Look out for him in the tight end section. You already know I love talking about him. So, not to mention Austin Eckler is still there. So I think there's definitely some room for growth, and I think there's definitely a ceiling that he hasn't tapped into yet. A lot of people, they talk about the second year being the year that quarterbacks really take that next step. It gives you another offseason to really be the guy. We're coming into this offseason. He's going to get all the first-team reps. He's going to get all the snaps at quarterback to get the chemistry right with these guys going into the regular season. And I think Justin Herbert's a guy who you can see climb up this leaderboard a little bit. I can see him, jumping over Aaron Rodgers, who I already mentioned. But, Russell Wilson, that'd be a little tough task. I like Russell Wilson. So maybe, I think, again, a great ranking right there by Fantasy Pros. I think ninth is right about where I would have him if I was doing these rankings as well.
Yeah. Someone where I was a little unsure at first, but he did put up some good stats last year is Ryan Tannehill at 10. So Ryan Tannehill, 351.36 fantasy points, 315 completions for 3,819 yards, 33 touchdowns to 7 interceptions, and ran the ball a little bit, just like everybody on this list, 43 times for 266 yards, but 7 touchdowns, which is a little nice. Lost his second wide receiver there in Tennessee, but what are your thoughts on Tannehill, Andrew?
So I guess not many complaints can be said for Derrick Henry, who gets over 2,000 rushing yards, but fantasy owners of his will be absolutely livid that Ryan Tannehill vultured 7 touchdowns on the goal line. Because 266 yards on 43 attempts is not a lot, and it's that kind of production that I don't expect to happen again, especially with that amount of touchdowns being scored. And like you mentioned, no Corey Davis, no Jonnu Smith, so I guess it's A.J. Brown and Anthony Ferguson season, baby. He was great. The one thing I love about Tannehill is he was really good against the blitz, and that has a lot to do with his offensive line. I think he posted an 89.8 BFF grade with a 76% completion percentage and 14 touchdowns, only 2 picks. So it was definitely a career year for Ryan. He's not a guy that I anticipated having in my top 10, just because I think there's a couple other guys that could elevate into that area, and we'll talk about later. I expect them to be right around, maybe in the 15, like 10 to 15 range, especially with the loss of like two of their pass catchers. And they're going to have to rely heavily on guys like, unless they make some big moves, they're going to have to rely on a guy like Khalif Raymond, who is very undersized, and Adam Humphries, who's also an undersized receiver, to get the job done in place of Corey Davis.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you guys for the breakdown there. We're going to stop at 10, and I want you guys to tell me who your favorite in that top 10 is. So, Jay, why don't you go first? Who's your favorite to have next season?
Well, besides Patrick Mahomes, I suppose I'll choose somebody else. Probably Lamar Jackson. I didn't have a lot of the research on Lamar Jackson, but he's a guy that I can see his ceiling start to grow the more and more he's able to become a better passer of the football. As Andrew kind of mentioned, adding another piece would be huge for them. They were in the Juju Smith-Schuster sweepstakes, actually offered more money than Pittsburgh, and Juju decided to stay with Pittsburgh. I mean, good on him, I guess, but I would have loved it. I mean, I would have loved having him come in to play the slot, but I would much rather prefer them going after Kenny Golladay, so it didn't, hurt my dreams or anything for Lamar Jackson's fantasy hopes that they didn't get Juju. I already have said it before on a few shows. I want to see Hollywood Brown play in the slot more, so I think if you go out there and get another true number one wide receiver, I can't even say another because they don't have one. Yeah, again, we talked about this already. Between Boykin and Des Bryant, those are the two guys that played most of their number one receiver snaps out wide, lining up on the opposite side of the field from Hollywood Brown. So I think if you can go get him another number one receiver, we've already shown the rushing abilities there. And it's not like Kyler Murray where, not that Kyler Murray's rushing ability is a fluke, but the touchdowns are definitely a fluke. Lamar Jackson is someone that they make a point of making sure that he gets in the red zone, and he's a big factor when it comes into that rushing touchdown production that he's able to provide.
Okay, perfect. Andrew, favorite in the top 10?
I mean, the top two, you could just really kind of, pick whichever one, Patty or Josh. But just based on overall excitement, I'm going to go back to a guy that I already talked about. I am so excited for Dak Prescott. I cannot tell you, I'm so excited to see Dak Prescott back on the field. Like I mentioned, he's coming back to an offensive juggernaut. He's going to have tons of weapons to work with. He's going to have a nice offseason of rehabilitation and recovering to get used to the playbook and get used to Mike McCarthy's system. I expect a huge season from him. I don't want to project anything just yet because I don't want to be like massively wrong, just because anything can happen in the NFL. But I mean, if he's not, I would imagine he throws for 4,500 yards and maybe at maybe 35 touchdowns at least. So Dak Prescott's the guy I'm most excited to see on the football field again. Top
Yeah.
5 quarterback, maybe even top 3. It's going to be hard with Lamar there and his rushing ability, but I have huge expectations for him.
Okay. We're gonna go into our favorite outside the top 10. So, who could you see supplanting one of these guys from anywhere from 11 to 16 there on this list, Jay?
So I'm not sure if he's going to be able to supplant somebody in the top 10, but somebody who's just egregiously too low is Cam Newton. Right now he's sitting at QB 29. So we have to scroll down a little bit to get to him. He finished third last season in rushing touchdowns. The only people that finished above him in rushing touchdowns was Derrick Henry, Alvin Kamara, and Dalvin Cook. He had the lowest passing yards and passing touchdown in his career with 2,657 passing yards and only 8 passing touchdowns. COVID really affected him last year. He was doing an interview the other day with Brandon Marshall, and he said, by the time I came back, I didn't feel comfortable physically, skillfully. A lot of discomfort came pre-snap. I was lost. I was thinking too much. The offense kept going, and I was stopped and stagnant for 2 weeks. By the time I came back, it was new terminology. It wasn't trying to learn a system from what it was. It was learning a 20-year system in about 2 months. Which, I mean, Tom Brady was there and was able to adopt the system pretty quickly. They started trying to change it up, especially with Cam, because they allowed him to run the ball a little more. Cam's been running the ball his whole career. I don't see that changing. I do see his passing ability being able to go up. Again, I think COVID played a really big factor in him. I kind of mentioned that on the last show. So Cam Newton is someone that I'd be buying low on right now as a player who can be really productive as a fantasy quarterback next year.
Andrew, favorite quarterback outside the top 10?
He's right outside it. He's number 11 right now, and I hate picking the guy who torched my boys in the Super Bowl, but Tom Brady, I imagine him being a top 10 quarterback next season. Like I said, he's right behind Tannehill in the rankings. He threw for 40 touchdowns last year as a 43-year-old quarterback, 12 interceptions, but had a passer rating of 102. And the reason why I just think he has a chance at cracking the top 10 is just because they're running it all back. I mean, he's getting a second season with Bruce Arians. They have one of the best offensive lines in the NFL. So I think in my mind, as long as you can keep when you give Tom weapons and then you protect Tom, he's going to be productive so long as he's healthy. Tristan Wirfs, Ali Marpet, and Ryan Jensen are some of the best in the business in protecting quarterbacks, and that's no different when it comes to Tom Brady. So I expect Tom Brady to have another successful and fruitful fantasy season for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
Perfect. We're going to go into a quick 30-second or less buy or sell round. Andrew already kind of mentioned it, but Dak Prescott, top 3 quarterback next year. So would we put Josh Allen? Would we take out Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Kyler Murray for Dak Prescott? Do you buy or sell Dak getting into that top 3?
Buy. Yes, sir. Yes, I do. I buy Dak Prescott getting into the top 3. Yes, that was perfect. It'd be hard for him to elevate himself above a guy who rushes the ball a lot like Lamar Jackson and gets into the end zone a lot with his feet. But I just expect him to have a phenomenal season next year. He started off last year on an incredible run, and it was derailed. So as long as he's healthy, I think Dak Prescott has a great chance of reaching that top 3 margin.
Buy or sell, real quick, Jay.
Yeah, I'll sell that. Between Lamar Jackson, Deshaun Watson, and Kyler Murray, I believe one of those guys will finish above him. And then Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen are just in a tier of their own. So, yeah, I would sell Dak Prescott as a top 3 quarterback next year.
Okay. Buy or sell, if you had to choose buy or sell one of these guys, Russell Wilson or Tannehill, who would you rather have on your fantasy lineup next year?
For me, it's Russell Wilson, not particularly close. I think he's just a better quarterback, better thrower of the football. His rushing ability is a little bit better. His ability to make plays after the fact and kind of ad-lib allow him to put up fantasy points, whether that be, again, through rushing or finding DK Metcalf deep. I think Russell Wilson is a better player in general, and so that just leads me to believe he'll have a better fantasy output going into next year as well.
So you buy Wilson, sell Tannehill. What about you, Andrew?
I'd also buy Wilson here. I think Tannehill is a term we haven't used in a while in today's NFL, is a product of a system used a lot with Alex Smith in his days. I think the ability for Derrick Henry and that offensive line to really dictate the line of scrimmage has a lot to do with Ryan Tannehill's success and how he's able to orchestrate the offense and be able to kind of dink his dunk was way downfield and then hit AJ Brown when he needs it. So I'll go with Wilson here. I have concerns about the second half of the season, but I'm buying Wilson over Tannehill for sure.
Gotcha. Okay, so my last question for you guys: buy or sell Aaron Rodgers, MVP, quality season next year?
Yeah, I'll sell because Patrick Mahomes is going to win it. Pretty simple.
I'll give a shorter but more prolonged analysis, I guess. I think any season that Aaron Rodgers is healthy, he's in line to be at least in the conversation or considered for MVP. So I'll just buy it just based on basically narratives and just probably the production that he's going to have. Even if he doesn't throw over 40 touchdowns, he's going to be in the conversation based on completion percentage, yards, and also because his touchdown to interception ratio is usually through the roof. It's going to be, if he throws for 28 touchdowns, he's probably only going to have like 3 picks. If he throws for 35 touchdowns, he's probably going to only have like 5 picks. So he'll be in the conversation just based on that alone.
All right, so just so I can put my hand in the cookie jar too,
I want to hear it.
My favorite inside the top 10 next year is Dak Prescott as well. I even think maybe this guy could have thrown for 5,000 yards the way he was going last season. Andrew said 4,500 yards and 35 touchdowns. I think that's like that would be like the minimum I would put him at. I could see him having a fantastic season where he just blows it out of the water and then makes Dallas look like they got a good deal on him. And then my favorite outside the top 10 probably would be. Damn, this is a good one. Just from looking at this board, I'd probably give it to Matt Stafford. I think you're looking at a veteran presence there where he isn't going to be phased too much by being in a new offense. I think he has a perfect opportunity with the Rams and McVay, who is just a McGenius. And he's going to get what he can out of Matt Stafford. If this is the shot to be a top 10 quarterback, then he's gonna potentially get that out of him, and you could probably get Matt Stafford like super late in the draft. So I'd be down to draft Matt Stafford with like a later pick and maybe avoid some of these high priced draft pick options like Patty and Josh. But yeah, that'll wrap up our quarterback breakdown. Thank you guys for giving your very thoughtful and genius analysis. We will catch you guys with some more breakdowns that'll be dropping soon. As always, thanks for joining us. This is the AGA Sports Show, and we'll catch you guys next time.
Thank you, guys.
Peace out, guys.